I'm Daytona Everett with news now from Fox. I am joined by Dr. Chin Hong of UCSF. He's an infectious disease specialist. Doctor, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Daytona. Thanks for having me on.
So the last time we spoke, it feels like years ago, but it was right when President Trump was diagnosed with COVID-19. What do you feel like has been the progression since then?
So I think the progression is really remarkable in that, given his risk factors, that he emerged pretty much unscathed as we see it from his images on the media. Of course, behind the scenes, I think a lot of people are still wondering and worried that he may not necessarily be the robust, presenter of, how he's actually doing behind closed doors.
Yeah, so I mean, we talked a little bit about what he looked like directly after that diagnosis, and you said he didn't look good. Now, from what you're saying, he's obviously out on the campaign trail, making himself apparent to the American voters out there. Do you think that he looks healthier now?
He definitely looks healthier, although there's still some differences between how he's presenting, how his playbook looks compared to before. And they include having a little bit shorter appearances when you look at the times that he spent, and maybe a little bit more halting. But I would say overall, looks like a patient who's recovering from COVID, but not necessarily 100% there.
We are approaching this final presidential debate. Do you think it's too soon to be holding something of that stature right now?
I think it's probably okay in terms of the timeline for transmission. We can't know for sure 100%, but it's probably okay from a transmission perspective. From a patient perspective, I wouldn't necessarily advise a patient who's gone through this experience of being in the hospital, requiring oxygen, getting 3 medications, to go and do something quite as taxing as that at this moment. But I do understand that, of course, there's a timeline. These days are critical for him to sort of have his views heard and to engage with his constituency.
Directly after he was released from Walter Reed Medical Center, he said a few things. He said, don't be afraid of the virus. He said he feels better than he did than 20 years ago. What is your response to all of that?
Well, I take issue with both of those comments, Daytona. The first, don't be afraid of the virus. I think a lot of people were a little bit surprised and disappointed in that comment because it doesn't necessarily reflect the experience of many people who've lost loved ones, whose lives have been upended by the virus, even if you survive, because we know that only 40% of people from several studies feel back to their normal after 3 weeks of being ill. In terms of, other more vulnerable populations, they of course wouldn't have as easy access to hospitalization or even the medications that he's received. And that goes for your average American. So that's the first comment. The second comment about being the best that he's felt in more than 20 years, I think that is actually very, very surprising, even for the person who's doesn't have to go to hospital with COVID. And I'm wondering if at that time and that feeling, if it reflected the fact that he was on steroids, because we do know that people on steroids actually feel on top of the world, even though there's some, underlying illness or not feeling well in reality. So I'm wondering if he would actually make that comment right now in reality, and if I were speaking to him as a physician, if he would actually tell me that to my face now that he's off of steroids.
Right. Is there a continued treatment for a COVID patient such as President Trump?
No, I think it's just watchful waiting. But as we learn more about the long-term effects of COVID, I'm worried that, he wouldn't be quite himself, for a long period of time, in the order of weeks. Of course, we know that for normal people, like I mentioned, only 40% of them feel normal at 3 weeks per se. but it can drag on for several weeks. And for a proportion of patients, probably less than 10%, but we're not sure yet what proportion of patients, they have what we call long hauler syndrome. So they can smell where it smells, they have brain fog, they may feel congested, just don't feel themselves, chronic fatigue. That can go on for months and months and months after. And again, I'm not really sure what the real Donald Trump is in terms of a patient. I'm seeing what the public-facing Donald Trump is. But just given my experience with patients, I'll just be worried that he's actually not feeling quite himself this soon after his illness.
Hmm. So for the debate stage, they're going to test anyone who's attending 2 days out. It's going to be in Nashville. Now that's good, right? So all these attendees are going to find out whether they're positive or they're negative for the coronavirus, and they won't let anyone in who is positive. As for these campaign rallies, he's going to several states across the country, obviously on his campaign trail ahead of the election. Most people are not wearing masks, and it's large crowds of people. What do you have to say in response to that?
I'll be very, very worried about some of these events being super spreading events. We know that COVID is exploding right now in the Great Plains states. It's emerging again with a vengeance in the Northeast, in some areas in New York. And of course, it's exploding in Europe, which is oftentimes the predictor of what's going to hit the East Coast. So I worry about the time of year as well, and these large groups of people getting together. In terms of the testing, even if they were all tested, the testing is great for telling us who's infected, but it's not great at telling us who's not infected. And that sounds like a play on words, but it just speaks to the fact that it probably picks up the tip of the iceberg of people who are beyond a certain point, but there's still potential transmission of those who even test negative at that point. It depends on what their time of exposure was and when the test will turn positive, even though somebody might actually have replicating virus. And in a rally sort of situation, there's a lot of emotion. So you have a lot of unmasked people getting together, shouting, screaming, being excited, cheering. That can all spread virus much more than 6 feet. And of course, these people not even, more than 6 feet apart. So it just amplifies the virus spread. It's almost like you have the virus, but then you put little exclamation marks on each of the viruses when you have all these behaviors happening. So again, weird and sort of concerning congregation of people, but also the time of year and the activities that they're doing and the context in which these are occurring, probably in cities where there's COVID on the upswing. That all makes me a little bit concerned for what's about to happen.
Sure. Well, COVID-19 is going to be a topic on the debate stage, and President Trump has touted the drugs that were used on him and also the drugs that are available, including a possible vaccine. What are you hearing on your end from other specialists?
So let's take both of those issues separately, the drug part and then the vaccine, because there are a few differences between those two. From the drug perspective, I think that, there is not that great availability yet for the average American to get a cocktail of antibodies. That's still in the research phase. So even if you can get it, you have a 50% chance of getting placebo. So you're not sure you can get it. You can get sort of another version, which is convalescent plasma. But most people on the front lines are not giving convalescent plasma outside of a trial, but it is possible to get it. The other two drugs are a little bit more available, remdesivir for sure, although depending on what we see in terms of a surge in the United States, there may not be enough remdesivir. We know that when California had a surge, for example, we had to ration out remdesivir to some people. So it just all depends on supply and demand. The third drug, dexamethasone, a steroid, is very available, so I don't see any problems with that. Now, when you think about the vaccine part, 100% chance it's not going to be available by election day. Even the most optimistic of the companies, which is Pfizer, said recently that they won't have it available until probably the end of November, and they're the most optimistic. But in reality, I don't really see that happening until 2021. There have been some issues with safety around two companies, with AstraZeneca and with J&J. I'm not too worried about the landscape of vaccines. There are a lot of them on the market. Operation Warp Speed has really put a lot of money into development of the vaccines. They're decent products, and I'm not really sure that these adverse effects are all linked to the vaccine itself, because with a scale of 30,000 to 45,000 people, something is bound to happen. These people are bound to get sick just in regular life. So it's the job of the Data Safety and Monitoring Board to really link whatever people have when they get sick to the actual vaccine that they're getting. So my big picture in the vaccine is I'm optimistic, definitely not by November 3rd, possibly in the spring of 2021. And a lot of people paying attention to safety. The FDA has recently put up a lot of guardrails that make our approval process a little bit more stringent compared to certainly before and compared to even other countries.
Yeah, so timeline's looking a little bit different than those that we've been seeing.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor. We appreciate you. We are hoping and praying for the safety of all Americans out there, especially who are voting at these polls, including poll workers. Again, just got to stay safe out there.
Thanks so much, Daytona.
Thank you.